So we have one more segment before lunch. There will be a delicious lunch, I have no doubt. The Fairmont does a great job. And I'm going to bring onto the stage right now Ed Burton, who is the CEO and president of the U.S.-Saudi Arabian Business Council, and Dr. Stephen Sokol, who's the head of the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh, on whose board I proudly serve. And they are going to have a conversation about Saudi Arabia. And I must tell you, Ed has participated in our conferences in the past, and he is extremely knowledgeable about that country. And I think Americans need to learn more about Saudi Arabia, and I think this will present an opportunity. Thank you, gentlemen. Take it away.
Thank you, Simon. So we certainly do have a great opportunity today to drill down on Saudi Arabia. And believe me, both Ed and I are well aware of the fact that we are what is keeping you from lunch. So we will try to be pertinent and try to get to our points, but we'd also like this to be an interactive conversation with all of you. So I have a couple of questions that I want to sort of tee up with Ed, but we would also like to engage all of you, so please start thinking about questions right off the bat. We have about 15 minutes for this segment. So as you may be aware, the U.S.-Saudi Arabia Business Council was established in December of 1993, and its mission is really to engage in mutual dialogue, developing deeper knowledge, deeper understanding between the United States and Saudi Arabia. And in all of its work, it's truly bilateral. It's supposed to promote greater trade and investment in both directions. And one of the things that I learned about Ed is that he's pretty much in Saudi Arabia every other month. And when he's there for at least a week, if not 2 weeks. So we have somebody with us today who really has his finger on the pulse of what's going on both in Saudi Arabia and here in the United States when it comes to business and development. He is the president and CEO, as you heard, and he's been in that position since March of 2006. And he just closed a book deal with Wiley. I don't know if you're familiar with them as a publishing house, but they do really, really great work. And his book is coming out early next year in January, February, and basically has to do with how to do business in Saudi Arabia. So hopefully some of the things that we'll be covering today are things that are touched on in that book, or where you even go into greater depth in that book, but certainly a great resource for all of you. So Ed, the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, particularly from a business standpoint, is one that dates back to the early 1930s. And certainly in the initial phases, it was predicated largely on oil. Oil continues to be an important factor in that relationship. But how would you describe the evolution of the U.S.-Saudi business relationship since then?
Well, as you mentioned, it's moved far beyond oil and gas. Originally, in February 1945, when President Roosevelt and King Abdulaziz were on the Great Bitter Lake on the USS Quincy, anticipating the aftermath of World War II. Certainly oil was a part of it, but also another linchpin in the relationship was also very much on the agenda, and that was the geopolitical issues in the region. And as we look today to what's happening and swirling around the kingdom, as we like to say, that has not changed. But certainly it has moved beyond oil and gas. The relationship, from our view, of course, on a daily basis, is much more economical than it's ever been. Last year, bilateral trade reached $71 billion, 52 billion of that in terms of mostly oil exports from Saudi Arabia to the U.S. and $19 billion of U.S. exports to Saudi Arabia. But the kingdom is striving for a much more diversified economy. Of course, oil and gas represents 50% of their GDP, which stands around $750 billion. And they are much about the task of diversifying. So I think one of the premier aspects of today's relationship is the economics, particularly the bilateral commercial relationship. And we have made many inroads over the last 4 or 5 decades in the kingdom in terms of gaining and maintaining market share. It slipped a little bit with the competitive nations of China and Japan and some of the European nations when you talk about specific sectors. But I think that we're holding our own, and I think the future is very bright for the relationship.
When we were waiting to come out on stage, we were talking a little bit, and Ed has been to Pittsburgh a number of times, and both in his current capacity, but also in his previous capacity working at the Department of Commerce. And we started talking a little bit about the G20 as well, and Ed pointed out that the kingdom is actually the only Arab country that's a member of the G20. Can you talk a little bit about that evolution and the value of that relationship as well?
Well, considering, 80 years ago, most Saudis, their household goods were on the back of camels and in pickup trucks, and many of today's captains of industry, and we're fortunate in our board of the Business Council to have many of them sitting on our board. Many of those were migrating as young men to Riyadh from other parts of the country, and to Jeddah, of course. But when you look at how far Saudi Arabia has come as a country, and particularly as an economy, you see that, of course, much of the presence as the only Arab nation represented on the G20, of course, is the power of oil revenues for that country. But I think it also represents the fact that Saudi Arabia is one of the most critically important countries in terms of the geopolitical issues that again swirl around the kingdom. And so I think in terms of the bilateral relationship, the United States has always depended on Saudi Arabia for support, not only economically with oil, but also in persuading top leadership there to some of their positions in terms of what their views are and how they would like that region to go. Now, with any relationship akin to a marriage, there are ups and downs, and certainly between the kingdom and the United States, there have been differences of opinions on the geopolitical side. But I think by and large, the relationship is very strong, and I think that reflects Saudi Arabia's posture within the global community and its importance to not only economics, but also future peace and prosperity in the region.
So Ed, I'd like to push you a little bit on the first part of what you were talking about, because of course you have a lot of experience working with hundreds of Fortune 500 companies as well as SMEs in a variety of sectors, ranging from construction to healthcare to defense and security, information technology, and so on. Given your experience, what do you think the high priority sectors are for U.S. investment?
Well, there's no question, as I said, the priority right now in terms of the bilateral commercial relationship with the United States is to attract more inward investment from the United States in critical areas that will bolster their efforts to diversify their economy. So when we look at oil and gas and downstream petrochemical, we see the kingdom looking at areas such as the manufacture of automobiles in the kingdom, building up their refining capacity. In fact, it was announced a couple of weeks ago that SABIC, and there you see Mohammed Al-Mahdi, those are my co-chairman. My U.S. co-chairman is Peter Robertson there, the former vice chairman of the board of Chevron, and Mohammed Al-Mahdi, the CEO and vice chairman of SABIC. SABIC announced one of the largest oil to petrochemical projects that will ever have been built in the Royal Commission of Yanbu, which is on the Red Sea. And it will, upon completion, be able to refine 200,000 barrels a day of crude into petrochemicals. And so when you look at the major complexes of Yanbu and Jubail, you see the kingdom's concerted effort to move towards value-added products from downstream. But it goes much beyond that. I mean, the economic prosperity in the kingdom is raising all boats in all sectors. Medical, healthcare industry, construction. The Saudi construction industry represents 39% of all construction projects in the GCC. And the list goes on and on. And so I think when U.S. business looks at Saudi Arabia and the GCC in general, they should see a youthful population. They should see an opportunity for brand loyalty, given its youthful population. And in terms of the diversity of industries, certainly opportunity reigns in all the GCC countries, and particularly Saudi Arabia.
So thinking about those opportunities, and also given that the Business Council is truly a bilateral organization and works in both directions, where do you see the opportunities for the kingdom in the United States?
That's been a tougher nut to crack for us. I think, unfortunately, you've had many in Saudi Arabia view the United States through skewed, I think, lenses in terms of investment opportunities. Now, that has not always been the case. Saudis actually are prolific investors, for instance, in real estate. They're one of the largest landowners, foreign landowners, and in particular sections of the United States. They're one of the largest holders of Treasury, U.S. Treasury securities. But in terms of a step up in the investment activities of Saudis, we see that gradually increasing. We have seen it over the last few years with opportunities in the medical healthcare sector in terms of acquisitions, industrial and process technologies in terms of the Saudis' buildup of their own industrial capacity. Taking equity positions in American companies, we've seen that, as well as joint ventures and strategic alliances. You know, I think the residuals of 9/11 are still with us in terms of what happened in the aftermath of that horrific tragedy. And so there was a divestiture of American investments by Saudis. That, again, has come back steadily. But there continues to be bumps in the road. For instance, the American Foreign Accounts Tax Compliance Act, which a lot of citizens in the GCC and all over the world are concerned about, because if you are a Saudi, whether you're a Saudi citizen, whether you're a U.S. citizen or not, but you were born in the United States, if you are a citizen, there are certain reporting requirements that you have to have to the tax authorities here in the United States. And if you don't do that, and if Saudi banks, for instance, are not in compliance, if there's a 30% fine on commercial transactions and other transactions that these citizens are associated with that bank. So it's and so when Saudis look at opportunities in the United States and they see, you know, the regulatory regimes here and the tax regimes, and I think that we have to do something about that, because when we talk about an effective tax rate of close to 40% versus, let's say, more congenial tax environments in other jurisdictions where they also hold investments, you know, there can be some disadvantages there.
So I'd now like to turn it over to you with questions from all of you. And the only request that I have is that you state your name and affiliation so Ed knows who he's talking to. No questions. Well, there is one. Okay, thank you. A microphone is on its way.
Thank you. Hi, Ed. I'm Nadia Morozowicz from Eaton. My question has to do with recent changes in import duties that Saudi's leveraging on low-voltage equipment. Is that a trend that is to bring more business in, or is it something to help with the population and getting people and youth more involved, or can you comment on that?
Yeah, there have been some rises in import duties. They will never obviously go beyond what the Saudis have committed to with the WTO accession in 2005. Without knowing the specifics of that particular hike, I would have to say that in general, they are looking more towards drawing business and investments in Saudi Arabia. One of the biggest pushes is to try to get companies that are already engaged in the market to look at manufacturing as opposed to the importation with their Saudi partners in the kingdom. But Nadia, Eaton is a member of the Business Council, so ping me or send me an email and we'll tackle that if it's posing a problem for you.
Any other questions?
My question is the role of sponsorship in Saudi Arabia in order to enter into construction business. Thank you.
I want to be clear, there's sponsorship in terms of visas, but you're talking about conducting construction operations in Saudi Arabia. You don't need a sponsor to be an American company to bid on projects and to win projects in Saudi Arabia. There are some limitations in terms of government contracts directly with the government. And that's something right now that you're not going to get around with government-funded projects directly with the procuring agency. But when you talk about being a wholly owned company in Saudi Arabia bidding on projects, there's no restrictions there. In terms of this particular projects, though, some of the government regulations require a Saudi company being involved in that. But again, I think in many instances since WTO accession in 2005, Saudi has drawn down on many of those restrictions in many sectors.
So, Ed, perhaps in closing, can you share with us what the catalyst was for writing your book, and maybe just tell us a little bit about what you hope to achieve with the book?
Well, having served in Saudi Arabia for 3 years, ending in 2006, I acquired an enduring respect for the business community. And as I surveyed a lot of the literature written about Saudi Arabia over the last couple of decades, actually, there's too many books written about the geopolitics, oil, the social aspects of Saudi Arabia, and it's not perfect, particularly for women. But I saw that there was an absence of books dedicated purely to the private sector and telling the positive stories of what's going on in the private sector, particularly as it pertains to young Saudi entrepreneurs and that particular segment of the business community trying to make their way as other young Arabs are within the GCC and making their mark, as many of the captains of industry did many decades ago. There are some very wonderful and positive stories about the kingdom and its business community. And so I wanted to write a book about how the core of the business community began decades ago, the evolution of that, issues that are faced by many of the family-owned businesses in terms of governance and corporate inherency. And so hopefully this book at the beginning of next year will shed some light on those developments. I'm been under pressure, so I'm acting as under my second extension with my publisher, so I'm trying to get it done. But it should be published around February or March of next year.
Well, Ed, thank you so much for taking the time to come to Pittsburgh when you could have been chained to your desk finishing up the manuscript. And I, for one, am certainly looking forward to seeing your book when it comes out, and we'll have to have you come back to Pittsburgh through the Middle East Institute or the World Affairs Council and talk about your book.
I'd be delighted. Thank you, Stephen. I also want to commend, as I did last night, Simin and the Middle East, American Middle East Institute for the job that they do. As I said last night, as I look around the world, I cannot see a region that is more critically important to global peace and prosperity than the Middle East. It really is the key to mending a lot of woes as you look at the world, particularly in that area. So thank you for bringing another annual conference to Pittsburgh, the 7th, I believe, and bringing relevancy to the dialogue regarding that region. So and thank you for inviting me again.
So kudos to Simin and to Ed. Thank you for being with us. And I guess this is now a break for all of you while they set the table for lunch. So please move out into the lobby area.